A shock by-election win for the Liberal Democrats, taking a seat that for almost half a century was Tory blue. Victory in CHESHAM and AMERSHAM say the Lib Dems is the beginning of the end of the Conservatives' electoral blue wall.
Liberal Democrats came here as the underdogs, but we campaigned hard and we are sending a shockwave through British politics.
But how worried should the Conservatives be? Also this lunchtime, new data shows a single dose of the Pfizer or AstraZeneca vaccine cuts the risk of hospitalisation by around 75%. Ministers say they feel deeply ashamed of low conviction rates for rape cases in England and Wales. A man in Greece admits killing his British-born wife and staging a robbery to cover it up. And a tale of heroism and survival, the woman who fought off a crocodile to save her sister.
It grabbed her on the leg and her behind and tried to death roll her and drag her away. So I was beating it on its snout and it grabbed my wrist and my arm. So I had to beat it off with my other arm.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, Rory McIlroy stays in the hunt at the US Open. He's 3 shots off the lead in a weather-affected first round in California.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. The Liberal Democrats are celebrating a stunning by-election victory after winning a seat that has been Conservative for almost half a century. Sarah Green won CHESHAM and AMERSHAM in Buckinghamshire by just over 8,000 votes, overturning a Tory majority of 16,000. The Lib Dem leader, Sir Ed Davies, says the Conservatives have ignored local voters and their blue wall of southern seats is now crumbling. Well, our political correspondent Ian Watson is in Chesham for us this afternoon. Ian.
Yes, Clive, you mentioned the blue wall. They've actually constructed one here. The Liberal Democrats trying to emphasise that they've been smashing through what they call the blue wall of Conservative support in southern England, turning a 16,000 Conservative majority here in Chesham and Amersham into an 8,000 majority for the Liberal Democrats. This came as a surprise to many here, and for local Conservatives, it came as a shock.
Of the Liberal Democrat Party is duly elected.
The Lib Dems say they've created a political shockwave. Their candidate, Sarah Green, defeated the Conservatives' Peter Fleet by a wide margin, gaining more than half the votes cast.
Thank you.
You know what happens when a really powerful, strong orange force goes against the blue wall?
The Lib Dems are claiming they can demolish Conservative majorities in the same way as Boris Johnson's party tore through Labour's strongholds in the north of England at the last election.
What was really noticeable at the beginning of this campaign was we knocked on doors in Chesham and Amersham. People kept saying to us, you're the first politicians to knock on our doors and ask our opinions since I've lived here, and I've lived here 40 years or 30 years or 20 years. People in this area have been taken for granted by the Conservatives, and that's why they've turned to the Liberal Democrats in such huge numbers.
The Conservatives didn't expect to lose here. The Liberal Democrats grabbed a brick from the blue wall by relentlessly campaigning on local issues. The candidate opposed a high-speed rail line, HS2, while nationally the party supports it. And they also say that proposed changes to the planning system played very badly with the government's traditional voters. And voters in Amersham were no longer displaying tribal loyalties.
Very happy, yeah. I'm very happy. Yeah, let's see what gets done now then.
I couldn't possibly vote for the Tories given the Brexit fiasco.
The Prime Minister praised the Conservative candidate in Chesham and Amersham and remained defiant in the face of defeat.
We are a great one nation party and we will continue with our mission to unite and level up, because that is the best way to deliver jobs, prosperity across the whole country.
But look at this guy, he looks a bit like...
Only last month, the Conservatives took Hartlepool from Labour, and some Conservative MPs are worried that all the talk of spending more in Northern English seats could turn some traditional voters off in the south.
In Remain voting middle-class seats in the south of England, the Conservative coalition has been weakened to some degree in the wake of Brexit. And Liberal Democrats, frankly, are the party that in many instances are best placed to profit from that. And that's what they've managed to do in CHESHAM and AMERSHAM.
In CHESHAM and AMERSHAM, the Liberal Democrats have stormed to victory, but it's still not clear if this is a crisis for the Conservatives, which will soon pass, or if, as the Lib Dems claim, there's now a change in the political climate. Well, the Liberal Democrats here certainly squeezed the Labour vote, squeezed the very life out of it in order to get them over the line against the Conservatives. But they say the bigger point is that the political geography of Britain is now changing. We all know about those seats that Labour lost to the Conservatives at the last election. But they say beneath the radar, the Lib Dems have been doing very well in some local council elections and that they are best placed to take the Conservatives on in the south of England. But before we get too carried away with all that, don't forget there's been some amazing Liberal Democrat by-elections in the past, in Orpington back in the early 60s and Bermondsey in the 80s. But in time and time again, those seats have been regained by the party who's held them for the longest. So there will be euphoria from Liberal Democrats here, but I think it's too soon to say whether there's going to be any permanent shift in the political landscape.
Ian, thank you. Ian Watson there in Chesham. New research suggests a single dose of the Pfizer or AstraZeneca vaccine reduces the risk of an infection that needs hospital treatment by around 75%. The figures from Public Health England also show the vaccines are effective on all the major known variants, including Delta. All adults in England are now eligible to book their first jab. With more, here's our health correspondent, Catherine Da Costa.
The NHS is hoping to see more of this. Long queues of over 18s waiting to get their first COVID jab. With a more infectious Delta variant now dominant in the UK and spreading fast among young adults, the pressure's on to get more jabs in arms.
Today is a huge milestone because everybody in this country aged 18 and above can now book their COVID vaccination. We've got 26 million people who are fully protected with both doses, which is vital, but for the millions of people in their 20s and 30s who haven't yet taken up that offer, make this weekend the moment when you come forward and get that protection for you, for your friends, that keeps us all safe and hopefully gives us our summer back.
Over 18s in Northern Ireland can already get their jab. In Scotland, all over 18s will have been offered a vaccine by the end of next week, while Wales has already offered all adults a first dose. But concern over the Delta variants delayed lifting restrictions by 4 weeks. The latest data on the Delta variant shows the number of confirmed cases has risen to just under 76,000, up by more than 33,000 in a week. Since February, a total of 806 people have been hospitalised. Most hadn't had a vaccine or had only received one dose. Only 84 of those admitted had received both doses.
If you've had 2 doses of either of these vaccines, you're more or less guaranteed not to end up in hospital. Your chances of ending up in hospital are reduced by more than 20 times. And even one dose, once you've had a chance to make an immune response to it, will very substantially reduce the risk of ending up in hospital.
The latest survey by the Office for National Statistics suggests in the week to last Saturday, COVID infections were rising in England, but are still much lower than earlier in the year. The trend's less certain in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
I'm very confident that we'll be able to go through with step 4 of the roadmap on the timetable that I've set out, with treating July the 19th, as I've said, as a terminus date. I think that's certainly what the data continues to indicate.
Despite an increase in infections, hospital admissions and deaths aren't rising at the same rate. The data will be closely watched, but early signs look promising. Catherine Da Costa, BBC News.
Ministers have apologised to rape victims for the low number of prosecutions and convictions in England and Wales. Just 3% of cases resulted in someone being charged in 2019 and 2020, down from 13% 5 years ago. The government has admitted budget cuts are partly to blame and has promised reforms. Here's June Kelly.
I think it's really important that people do report, but at the same time, my gut instinct is to just say, don't bother.
They didn't think that a jury would believe that he had raped me. I actually felt suicidal.
If you're a rapist, the likelihood of you being held to account in the courts is minuscule. The words of some of those who've witnessed and experienced how the criminal justice system treats rape complainants. One rape survivor whose attacker escaped justice has waived her anonymity to speak out.
I feel really sad that it's taken this for them to listen. An apology is worth nothing to me unless they're actually going to change. Do you know what a real, you know, if they want some kind, you know, to kind of make this any better for those victims who have been through this, then reopen their cases, because they know that they've let 98% of rapists free.
Catherine was told that messages on her phone undermined her case. She sent them because she didn't want to aggravate her attacker, who threatened her with a knife. Complainants sometimes have to give up their phones for months as police gather evidence.
Like how to support people.
Kitty Gardner works as an independent sexual violence advisor, helping victims.
When you think about the idea of having to hand over your phone and it potentially being gone for 18 months, that's a really massive thing to ask of someone. Our whole world is on our phone, and you're asking someone who's already feels really vulnerable to give that up.
As part of its rape review, the government says that in the coming years it's aiming to process up to 10,000 mobile phones a year at the early stages of an investigation. So some victims should get their phones back more quickly. The plan is also to publish regular scoreboards which will show how different parts of the criminal justice system are performing, and to focus on the behaviour of suspects rather than judging victims. There'll be a new framework for police and prosecutors.
This is a tanker that will take a little time to turn, and it's one where we have to be very careful to make sure that we build a new operating model, if you like, a new way of investigating and prosecuting rape, that we build it in a way that is sound and just and provides, good, solid British justice.
While all who work in this area welcomed the idea of a review, the charity Rape Crisis said there had been a lack of engagement with those on the front line, as well as victims and survivors. June Kelly, BBC News.
The Democratic Unionist Party is looking for a new leader again, following Edwin Poots' resignation. He'd only been in the job for 3 weeks, but angered the party after agreeing a deal with Sinn Féin. Well, our correspondent Dan Johnson is at Stormont for us this afternoon. Dan, what's the deal that cost Mr Poots his job?
Well, that was all about laws to enact the Irish language legislation here in Northern Ireland to promote and protect that language. Now, that had been the sticking point that had stopped Sinn Féin supporting Edwin Poots' preferred candidate, Paul Givan, for the office of First Minister here. So there'd been a stalemate through this week. But then there was a deal struck between the parties, the DUP and Sinn Féin, overseen by the Northern Ireland Secretary, that in effect, if those laws on the Irish language weren't passed here by the autumn, that they would be passed at Westminster by the UK government. That was enough to bring Sinn Féin on board to support Paul Givan in the job of First Minister, but it enraged many of the DUP's own membership. They said that that was a sign of Edwin Poots' weakness in leadership, that he'd rolled over in giving too many concessions too quickly to Sinn Féin and effectively giving decision-making that should have rested here to the UK government if there was no progress. So that's why there was a revolt yesterday through the evening. It was clear that Edwin Poots had lost the confidence of his party, and late last night he resigned from the job of leader after just 3 weeks. Make no mistake, this has been described as a crisis in the party by many of its own members. It is now looking for a new leader for the second time in just over a month. The favoured candidate at the moment appears to be Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, but he hasn't announced his intentions yet.
OK, Dan, thank you. Dan Johnson there, live at Stormont. Now, police in Greece say the husband of a 20-year-old British woman has admitted killing her and staging an armed robbery to cover up the crime. Babis Anagnostopoulos confessed to murdering Caroline Crouch last month at their home in a suburb of Athens. Mrs. Crouch, who was born in the UK, moved with her parents to Greece as a child. Nick Beek has more details.
Consoling his British mother-in-law in the graveyard yesterday, Babis Anagnostopoulos had led the family in mourning for his wife Caroline, brutally murdered by burglars, he said. But he had killed her. Loving birthday messages on Instagram, now a lie. Just like his account of what happened in the family home last month. Caroline was just 20 years old. She'd moved to a Greek island as a child and she was now a young mum herself. This was the moment plainclothes officers confronted Anagnostopoulos, asking him to come with them. They'd worked out from phone and smartwatch data he'd made up his story. The helicopter pilot, used to being at the controls, was flown to Athens, where he would now face trial. The man who played the grieving husband, now being vilified by a furious Greek public. Nick Beak, BBC News.
People in Iran are voting for a new president, but with prominent reformist candidates barred from running, almost all those in contention are seen as hardliners. Well, our Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen is here. Jeremy, if they're all hardliners, does that suggest that there is a front runner in here?
Yes, all but one hardliners. There's a technocrat who some people think might attract a few votes, but the whole landscape seems to be tilted in favour of a man called Mr. Raisi, who is the head of the judiciary. He's a hardliner. He's someone who was implicated in a campaign that resulted in the executions of thousands of political prisoners and rebels back in the 80s. So it's a pretty unsavoury past. The question is whether this is going to change a great deal in Iran. There are some suggestions that Raisi is being groomed to be the next supreme leader because the president is not the number one guy there. That may or may not be the case. And there's also the question about the big foreign policy issue, which is the Iran nuclear deal. Will that be revived? There are suggestions that it might be, and Raisi has said that if he does win, then he'd certainly support that. And both the US would like it to be revived, I think, because the US would like the Middle East to calm down a bit. And Iran needs it to be revived because its economy has been absolutely battered by American sanctions.
Yeah, OK. Jeremy, many thanks. Jeremy Bowen, our Middle East editor there. It is 17 minutes past 1, our top story this lunchtime. And the Liberal Democrats are celebrating a stunning by-election victory after winning the seat of CHESHAM and AMERSHAM, which has been Conservative for almost half a century. And thousands of Scotland fans are in London for tonight's big match against England at Wembley in the Euros.
Coming up on the BBC News Channel, England's women mean business against India with early wickets on the third day. Sophia Ecclestone proving the star performer in the one-off test in Bristol.
This evening, the England and Scotland men's football teams meet in a major tournament for the first time in a quarter of a century. It's a match with huge implications for both nations' Euro 2020 hopes. England will qualify for the knockout stage with a win, while Scotland need a victory to keep their hopes alive in the competition. Thousands of Scotland fans have been arriving in London for the game at Wembley, as Jane Dougal now reports.
Scotland fans have descended on London for a much-anticipated match against the old enemy.
Yes, we're looking forward to it. We're going to beat England 2-0.
I'll say 2-1. We'll go for that, 2-1. We'll take it.
We're very generous. We'll give you one.
We're here for a stag do and a bit of football as well.
Have you got tickets to the game?
No tickets, but we'll get you in a pub.
The last time these two countries met in a major tournament was Euro 96. It finished in a win for England, sealed with this memorable Paul Gasmus Gaza celebrations. Others, not so much.
My foot slips, my right foot slips. Not to the extent that it's going to make a difference to what Gaza did. It's taken England's greatest ever footballer to do that to me. There's no shame in what happened to me with the goal and everything else. People actually seem to think that it keeps me awake at night, this goal. You know, and you can imagine this week, last week, the week before, the amount of stick and the amount of social media, every platform you can imagine. It's there, and I'm getting it.
This was just the start of English celebrations last evening after that amazing match at Wembley.
Typical Gaza, he had the water bottle neatly placed behind the goal, ready to go for the celebration, so he couldn't have planned it any better.
25 years later, the stage is set for a repeat of the oldest international fixture in the world. England already have a win under their belts in this tournament, but Scotland go into the match following a loss. But the squad is happy to be underdogs, and they already have a feel for playing in England. Their training base is in the quiet town of Darlington, where they've created something of a Scottish embassy and developed a siege mentality ahead of this match.
Obviously there has to be belief, there has to be a confidence level that you can go to any team and play well against them, whether that's England at Wembley or a different nation in a different country. You always have to have that self-belief and that sort of level of arrogance where we can play and we're more than suited to be on this stage, as we've proven with the journey that we've had to get here.
Confidence in the England camp is in abundance after scoring in their victory over Croatia.
Then plays it into Sterling! That will do nicely!
They will consider themselves favourites, but Scotland is a potential banana skin, and the significance of this fixture isn't lost on the captain.
We know what it means as players to represent England, and when you're playing a home nation like Scotland, we know what that entails with the fans, and it's about us performing on the pitch and tactically getting it right and making sure that we exploit whatever weaknesses they have on the day.
There have been many battles between these two countries. Some might argue none as bitter as those on the pitch.
More from Jane at Wembley in a moment, but first to Frankie McCamley, who's at King's Cross train station in North London. Frankie, so the Tartan Army, it's on the move, and quite a few of them behind you, it seems. Are they in good voice?
Well, yes, absolutely. This is the area where thousands of football fans from both sides of the border have been coming through King's Cross Station. Today, it's a little damper than yesterday, but you can still see everywhere you look football fans, members of the Tartan Army. You can see some of them behind me right now making the most of it, soaking up the atmosphere. But because it is so wet today, everyone's trying to find that little bit of shelter. Now, every football fan I've been speaking to so far have said that they're going to be finding a pub around the capital to enjoy the match later on this evening, because there are no official fan zones. Usually fans would be heading to Trafalgar Square to get together, but that's been cordoned off. It's now an official fan zone for 750 socially distanced key workers. Now, the Mayor of London has urged people not to come to London unless they do have tickets for the match itself. There are only around 2,500 tickets available to Scottish football fans at Wembley, but it is estimated around 20,000 fans are still heading to London anyway. So the lack of fan zones isn't putting them off. The poor weather isn't putting them off. They are desperate to make the most of this, Clive. It's been 23 years in the making for Scotland to get to the Euros, and as you can see here, they're going to make the most of it.
Indeed. All right, let's go to Jane at Wembley. Jane, no bones about it. Scotland have to win to keep their hopes alive, and if England get a victory, they go through.
Yeah, well, first of all, Clive, I think the Scotland fans have brought the rain down with them to London. It's a little bit quieter here at Wembley for now, because it won't be long before more than 2,800 Scotland fans are inside this stadium, probably making more noise than their numbers might suggest, because yes, their country does need their support. Scotland desperately need points from this fixture if they're to have any hope of staying in the tournament. And make no mistake, this match against England is going to be a tough one. They have had a bit of a boost ahead of kick-off because the Arsenal and Scotland defender Kieran Tierney, who wasn't available for their first defeat against the Czech Republic, they lost that 2-0 because of a calf injury. He is in contention to start in this match tonight. He has trained with the squad over the past few days. We've had confirmation of that. And Scotland might well need him because, Clive, on paper, England should probably win this. They are ranked 4th in the world, according to the FIFA rankings. Scotland, on the other hand, are ranked 44th. So an uphill battle for them. But don't forget, this is a little bit like a derby. Statistics and rankings go out of the window when you add passion to the equation. Probably a few grudges and possibly a chip on the old shoulder. Anything could happen in this, the oldest international fixture in the world. Clive.
Indeed, Jane Dougal there live at Wembley, and Frankie McCamley at King's Cross. Thanks, both. An NHS trust has been fined more than £700,000 for failing to provide safe care and treatment. East Kent Hospital's NHS Trust was prosecuted by the Care Quality Commission following the death of baby Harry Richford and the treatment of his mother Sarah in 2017. A British woman who saved her sister's life by fighting off a crocodile has been speaking about the moment it attacked. The pair was swimming in a lagoon in Mexico when the croc tried to drag 28-year-old Melissa Lorry underwater. Her twin Georgia had to fend it off by repeatedly punching the creature while trying to pull her sibling to safety. She's been speaking to Will Grant.
A bandage hiding the teeth marks in her wrist is the only outward sign of Georgia Lorry's recent encounter with a crocodile. But the horrific attack, which almost killed her twin sister Melissa, has left much deeper emotional scars.
I actually heard her scream and I saw her being taken underneath and by the crocodile. And then I realised she was really in trouble when I was calling out her name and there was no response from her. My worst fear became a reality, is that I've probably lost her, that she's dead.
Their nightmare began here at the Manialtepec Lagoon. Their unlicensed German guide told the tour group they could swim in these waters despite it being hatching season for crocodiles.
I grabbed her body, I pulled it towards me, I rested her on my chest, and she was blue, so I tried to revive her. But then the crocodile came along, so I beat it off, and it went away. But then she started going into a fit, flailing her arms and legs. I think she thought it was still attacking her. And so I tried to calm her down, and then it came back. So I beat it off again, but I was trying to hold her head up at the same time so she didn't take in any more water, and beat it off. And then it went away, and I dragged her body away to safety, and then a boat came along, but unfortunately they couldn't get close enough with the boat, and it took a little while, and then it came back for a third time, and then that's when I sustained actually the most injuries, because it grabbed her on the leg and her behind and tried to death roll her and drag her away. So I was beating it on its snout, and it grabbed my wrist and my arm. So I had to beat it off with my other arm.
Georgia's quick thinking and bravery, hitting the animal repeatedly on the nose, undoubtedly saved Melissa, who is still recovering from a perforated intestine and other injuries.
Crocodile attacks in this part of Mexico are rare, but rarer still is to survive one and tell the story afterwards. The Lorry twins are pretty unique in that regard, but the scars of their experience, both emotional and physical, could take a lifetime to fade.
She thought that this was the way that she was going to go, and she wasn't ready. And she was thinking of me in her final moments, like, what's going to happen to Georgia? What was she going to, you know? It's really harrowing that she was feeling that way. I'm counting my lucky stars that someone was looking out for us.
Will Grant, BBC News, Puerto Escondido.
Now, the Duchess of Cambridge is backing a new project aimed at transforming the lives of young children. She says the Royal Foundation for Early Childhood will raise awareness of the importance of the first 5 years of a child's life and also help create a happier society. Here's Daniela Ralph.
The youngest in society are now the biggest part of the Duchess of Cambridge's royal work. She says she's learned that the hardest social challenges often begin in the earliest years of childhood. For her, improving the lives of the very young is the social equivalent of managing climate change. It is a bold ambition. The new centre will pull together academics, medics, psychologists and a whole range of early years expertise under one organisation.
Working closely with others, the centre hopes to raise awareness of why the first 5 years of life are just so important for our future life outcomes, and what we can do as a society to embrace this golden opportunity to create a happier, more mentally healthy, more nurturing society. By working together, my hope is that we can change the way we think about early childhood and transform lives for generations to come. Because I truly believe big change starts small. And some of the science behind all of it is extraordinary.
When the Duchess spoke to the BBC last year, it was clear that her work with young families was where she was going to focus her energy. Palace aides say she doesn't want to just be a figurehead in this area. She wants to generate and lead practical change to help prevent childhood challenges becoming a crisis in adulthood. Daniela Ralph, BBC News.
A wandering walrus called Wally has surprised residents of the Isles of Scilly, apparently trying to hitch a ride on a local boat. A number of rubber dinghies were burst by the creature as it tried to clamber aboard. At St Mary's, it's the latest sighting of Wally, who was spotted off Wales in March, Cornwall in May and Spain just a fortnight ago. Conservation experts are monitoring his welfare and say he's fine. It's hoped Wally will return north to his native home in the Arctic soon. A well-travelled walrus there, a bit like the Scotland fans heading to Wembley. Helen Willits, what's the weather going to be like for them?
Oh, well, they've left the fine weather behind, Clive. Look at this. This is a picture of Inverness right now. This is where the sunshine is. It's not further south, as we've seen. In fact, this persistent rain will continue throughout the rest of today, continuing to give difficult driving conditions, spray and standing water, and some further likely flooding. In fact, it could even give some thundery rain. It's all tied in with this area of low pressure. It's very welcome for the gardens, but there's a brisk wind with it, and it could, as I say, turn a bit thundery. And some places have already had a month's worth of rain, so that's about 50 millimetres of rain. There'll be more in the next few hours, as you can see. But a very different story, as I've said already, further north and further west, across the west of Wales, northwest England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Very few showers actually today compared with yesterday. A light breeze, feeling pleasant. But as well as our rain, we've got quite a brisk wind coming in off the North Sea, so temperatures are lower than yesterday, but it's still muggy. It's really quite close out there, despite that heavy rain. Now, that heavy rain is having a positive effect on the levels of pollen for those who've really been struggling with the very high levels in recent days across central and eastern areas, but where we have the sunshine, clearly it's still very high. And will it have cleared that rain in time for the football match this evening in Wembley? Well, it's touch and go. As you can see, it's starting to pull away, but leaving some showery rain behind. So I think as the play continues through the evening, hopefully by the end of play, the main rain will be over. But it does look like a wet affair travelling to and at first. It will clear, though, through this evening and overnight, and with it, it takes the humidity. So a much more comfortable night for sleeping in southern and eastern areas if you've been struggling, like I have. Of course, elsewhere, we had a fresh night already last night, and that will again happen tonight, giving some sunshine tomorrow. Quite a bit of cloud across England still to break through in the morning, but otherwise it looks drier and brighter for most as well. Perhaps a few more showers dotted around Scotland, Northern Ireland, and later in the south as well. But it will feel pleasant with those light winds, and it will be a drier, brighter, warmer day across southern and eastern days, and not so humid either. However, that doesn't last. The humidity returns, we think, through Saturday night. Bit of a dog's dinner as we get into Sunday. The devil's in the detail, if you like. We've got low pressure coming from the southwest, one moving up into the North Sea. So it does look more unsettled and more widely unsettled with that rain reaching other areas. If you have got plans for the weekend, please do stay tuned to the forecast. Don't make this the last one that you see, and you can keep up to date on the warnings as well, Clive, on the website.
OK, Helen, thank you. Helen Willits there. And a reminder of our top story. The Liberal Democrats are celebrating a stunning by-election victory after winning the seat of CHESHAM and AMERSHAM, which has been Conservative for almost half a century. That's it. So, goodbye from me. Now on BBC One, let's join our news teams where you are. Have a very good afternoon.